Everyone. We're doing something super interesting this time around. We typically mostly have researchers as well as applied AI practitioners and ML practitioners on our panels. But I'm super excited to be doing this panel with members of the media. So today we wanted to kind of actually welcome Sharon from VentureBeat, Kevin from the Information, and Thomas from the Next Web. Unfortunately, Thomas can't make it today because he just came down with the flu. So Sharon and Kevin, it's just us, but hopefully we can make it fun. Our like audience, just so you guys know, tend to be typically data scientists, AI and ML practitioners, also sometimes AI and ML kind of like executives and such. So I think they'll really enjoy what you guys have to say, especially your perspectives around, around the space and so on. Let's get started by first maybe each of you introducing yourself a little bit and also telling us a little bit about what excites you most, or what are the one or two things that you've had to cover over the last year or so that's made you that's made you like say aha, that's pretty cool. Maybe Sharon, ladies first, you should go first.
Okay, yeah, I'm Sharon Goldman. I'm senior AI writer at VentureBeat. I've been at VentureBeat since April, but I've covered enterprise technology for over a decade. I've written for publications like CIO, Forbes, Business Insider. Um, yeah, what keeps me excited is that I'm always learning. I feel like a little bit like I'm coming to VentureBeat as, a little bit more of a layperson because I've covered enterprise technology at a very high level, but this is, a position where I'm really digging deep. So, I'm always telling folks that I speak to, I'm, really needing to learn here. You need to educate me. So that's just been super interesting for me. In terms of like, specific AI innovations that excite me, I've covered retail for a long time, and it's been really interesting to see sort of the latest ways that top retailers, like Walmart are using AI, sort of across the organization now, not just in very narrow ways, so everything from supply chain and procurement to consumer applications for fitting clothes and SEO. The other thing I thought of was that I get so many pitches now around advances in personalized medicine using AI to diagnose very specific diseases, personalize what type of medicine is prescribed to patients. So those kinds of things are just really interesting to me, and I'm excited to see how it evolves.
That's great. Yeah. Kevin?
Yes, I'm Kevin McLaughlin. I'm a reporter at The Information. I cover enterprise software broadly, which of course includes enterprise AI companies as well. Um, by the way, I'm speaking to you from my car. I'm having some work done on my house and there's some drilling going on. So I apologize for the setting. It actually is the quietest place in
Cool,
my
actually. Yeah.
and I have two small children, and I think AI for me is sort of applied as it pertains to that. And what I mean is, we have Alexa in our home. I have found that the abilities of Alexa over the last 5 years have become noticeably better, and really, in some ways, the kids are able to engage with it more. And I feel like I've seen that just over the last couple of years, like the language models have improved. And I hope they'll continue to improve because, frankly, I'd love to offload some of the parenting duties that I have to the AI. Uh, and then the other thing, and we live near Tilden Park in Berkeley, and my kids are always finding bugs and spiders and things. And I think computer vision is really the most exciting part of AI for me personally, because the ability to, call up the Google app on your phone and say, is this a black widow or is it something more benign, gives us a lot of peace of mind. So it's super exciting, those two areas for me.
Great. No, I think if you look back to, let's say, even 3 years ago in 2019, if any, I don't know if any of us were asked, like, hey, can you predict what AI would do in the next 3 years? I'm not entirely sure any of us would have come up with something like either a DALI or a GPT-3 or any of that. So yeah, I think, in a lot of ways AI is hyped, but the hype is not sometimes enough, I think. Having said that, like, you guys mentioned personalized medicine, retail, computer vision, and language, etc. We clearly see that the big tech companies, we mentioned Amazon, Google, Facebook, are making a ton of strides in AI, right? Billions of dollars spent on that in that space, lots of breakthroughs, and a lot of times, I mean, I think OpenAI right now, to some extent, I almost feel like should fall into that category because they're so well funded. A lot of these AI innovations are being, in some ways, released into the market, but controlled largely in some ways by the big tech companies. But at the same time, you're seeing like an enormous amount of funding, when it comes to startups. How do you see that evolving? Like, in your, Sharon, for example, in your experiences, just in terms of other spaces as well, do startups have a role to play here, or is this like mostly, mostly this, the arena of like big tech companies?
Well, I will say that I feel like I started just as at VentureBeat, just when the startup scene might, now it's like cooling a little bit in terms of funding. But I'm also amazed at, the number of startups that are, just continuing to proliferate in many different segments around AI. And while AI startups, it seems like they're better off than some segments in terms of tightening of funding. Experts tell me that, there seems like there will definitely be consolidation in many areas. So one story I was thinking about that I worked on recently was around kind of making sense of this very highly fragmented MLOps ecosystem, which of course Abacus is a part of, and how that area might kind of like consolidate or bundle, over time. So I spoke to a Gartner analyst who said that, you'll start to see that kind of bundling of different capabilities. One startup might have this very best of breed capability here and another one here, but it's so hyper fragmented. It's become almost, impossible. It's a point where there are so many specialized niches that it's almost unsustainable to build like a whole stack in an understandable way, for a production pipeline. So I thought that was really interesting, sort of seeing down the pike how things are going to evolve as far as capabilities and bringing it all together so it makes sense for an enterprise.
Makes sense, yeah. Kevin, how do you see the startups evolving? Also, any favorite startups that you'd like to call out?
Well, I think, I mentioned I cover enterprise software and enterprise AI. I think the lines between those are blurring. And I think 5 years from now, there won't be any such thing as enterprise AI because it will be just part of the enterprise software world. I think that one interesting development that I've been tracking over the last year, it's sort of adjacent to enterprise AI, but it is also part of enterprise AI. You have Snowflake and Databricks are starting to become competitors. And Snowflake, of course, offers a data warehouse. Databricks started out in the machine learning tooling space, and now they're kind of moving into each other's turf. And I think, if you're talking about what could happen in the future relating to best of breed companies, I think you could see more of these companies going adjacent to what their strengths are and acquiring companies. And Snowflake acquired Streamlit a few months ago to kind of become more attuned with data scientists and machine learning practitioners. And so, I think that you'll see startups building on strengths and acquiring companies and perhaps, trying to expand their platforms even more. Now, you mentioned, favorite companies. I don't have any favorite companies, but three of the ones I've been following for a long time because they are old companies, relatively old companies, are DataRobot, Dataiku, and H2O.ai. And these are all the machine learning platform type companies.
All
And
direct competitors of ours. But anyway, yes, please go for it.
exactly. And I think that, they're all like 10 years old or more. And I think that, at this point, I think there's a real question about whether, I mean, they had an opportunity to become those best of breed companies, and Data Robots certainly acquired a lot of other pieces to augment its platform. But when you look at sort of how things are going with all three, I think it's not really clear that one of those is going to become that company.
No, I mean, I would agree with that. And MLOps has been really interesting, partly because it like kind of energizes everybody else to bring, to build ML models in production. I feel like sooner or later we're going to have that inflection point where that happens. Having said that, we saw like a ton of funding. Clearly, I don't know, maybe multi-billions, obviously, over the last year into AI companies, into crypto and everything else. Of course, that has really kind of cooled off. I mean, some would even say fallen off a cliff. But you guys are on the front lines. You're here the announcements and whatnot. How do you think that's going? Will we see like a surge back up again because we're seeing the market come back a little, or do you think it's still going to be anemic? Maybe Kevin, you can take that first, followed by Sharon.
Sure. I mentioned DataRobot, Dataiku, H2O. Last year, all three of those companies raised big rounds at big valuations. Databricks, of course, had a huge round last August at a 38 billion valuation. Things have obviously slowed this year, which really isn't any surprise given the macroeconomic environment and all the talk about a potential recession. There's still been a few rounds, though, notable rounds in enterprise AI. I think one of the ones for me I noticed is Tecton raising 100 million Series C in July. Machine learning operations,
So
of course.
I think they raised it in November. So that was
Oh,
pre. This
oh,
is
okay.
inside information, but that's
Okay,
fine.
yeah. All right. Well, I mixed up the date on that, but yeah, things have clearly slowed down in the first half of the year. There has been,
You
it
didn't mix
seems,
it up. It was just announced then. They had raised it before. That's all. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Applied AI still seems to be getting funding. There's companies like Icera and Invoca had rounds over the summer. So yeah, I wish I could have an answer for you in terms of how things are going to play out in the second half. I'm not an expert on these matters, but I would say that it seems like if you are a company and if you're an enterprise and you're adopting AI, things are still very early. There are probably numerous projects scattered across the organization, depending on the size of your company. I think I think companies would be doing themselves a disservice if they were to just stop all investment in AI completely. So I think things will continue to develop, perhaps not at the pace that they were developing last year on the funding front.
Got it. And so, just to follow up slightly there, I'm sure there are lots of people in the audience who are thinking and ruminating about starting a company. So, from your point of view, is that a go or like wait?
Uh, that's
Meaning,
for me.
yeah.
Now would be a pretty scary time to start a company, but lots of great companies have been started during scary times. So
That makes sense. Sharon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I would say my inbox seems a little bit slower when it comes to announcing new funding rounds, and maybe those funding rounds are a little smaller. Folks that I've talked to recently seem to think that, certain areas will still be very vibrant, like conversational AI is just, on pace, I guess. It's hard for me to see as well, like what's coming down the pike. It's hard to imagine that the companies that, listed AI invested as their top priority earlier in the year, we're suddenly going to like do some kind of about face. But, I guess it depends on the segment and, how things learn, for example, like I definitely think like in areas like healthcare and financial services, like, those verticals are still looking for solutions. So, and they're farther ahead in the maturity game. So I feel like that's where you're still, when I do get, the latest funding rounds, those are the areas that I'm seeing them in.
Got it. Yeah, so a lot of applied AI. Yeah,
Right.
no, from an entrepreneur's point of view, I agree with Kevin that, the bad times in some ways are the best times to start a company. Part of the reason is if you're looking for talent, it's a little bit easier to get the talent. I'm sure you're looking for two things, right? Funding and talent. So talent is definitely easier during the bad times. And for funding, I always think like the good companies or the good ideas always do get funded. So it's actually better for you to go through a funding around when the market's not great, because then in some ways it kind of vets your idea. You get better, you get better at figuring out exactly what you want to build and so on. So yeah, so that means just go ahead and start if you guys are thinking of starting something. But let's change tracks a bit. I don't know if you guys, any of you want to comment on this, just because I just heard the news, and then I'm sure you're like hearing this news every day. Any comments on the Elon Twitter situation, just for a minute? I know, Kevin, any thoughts?
Yeah. Twitter is not a company I follow closely. We did speak with Parag Agrawal last year, though, before he was promoted to CEO. And the conversation was mostly about kind of I asked him, Twitter goes down a lot. You're having sort of operational issues. Like, what are you planning to do about that? And he did say, we need to get better and we need to sort of improve a lot of our processes. And of course, this is before he was promoted to CEO. But during that conversation, we did touch on AI a little bit, but we kind of ran out of time. But he did say, like, this is absolutely something I want to talk about with you. Let's set up another call. And ultimately, he became CEO, so he's a little hard to get in touch with. But I do think that Twitter has a lot of aspirations to use AI broadly. I'm just not like in tune with the company enough to really comment on what those are. But certainly it seems like an interesting approach to what seems to be a very difficult, perhaps unsolvable problem.
Got it. Yeah, no. Personally, I do think they are. I mean, one of the big places we recruit from, and I know about is Twitter. So they do have a lot of AI engineers, and definitely doing something around spam for sure. But anyway, let's talk about something which is probably in the minds of everybody right now, which is remote versus in-person work. The reason, especially all the people who are, I would say, office workers or people who are like the laptop crowd, so to speak, this has become a hot topic for large companies as well as startups. I see on Twitter a poll almost every day, and some people kind of really being very much for in-person work, even claiming that startups who are doing remote work will fail. One, how are you seeing the conversation evolve in that space? And two, how do you think it will what would be the end result of something like this? How do you, what do you believe will be an end result? Will it be remote or fully or hybrid? Any thoughts on that would be very much appreciated. Sharon?
Yeah, I haven't covered this issue extensively at VentureBeat, but we are a 100% remote company. So it's just so difficult for me to imagine, tech companies reverting to the mean of in-person work. So and especially when you're talking about an area like AI and ML, when there's a skills shortage. I mean, it's just hard for me to imagine that a company based in San Francisco or Austin could fulfill their needs, based only on people from that local area. So, when it comes to AI and ML tech companies, unless it's, I suppose if it's in a smaller market and there's like a certain narrow, broad skill focus that could be gleaned from the local area, I just can't imagine it not being, not even hybrid, like 100% remote seems to be the way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, sorry.
I just think this is a really difficult question to answer, and it's just such a complex topic because there really is a school of thought in software development like that you need to be in the same building, in the same room. And even people like Tom Siebel, CEO of C3.ai, is very much a proponent of in the office type of work. And then of course you have the sort of the other side of the equation, which is startups are just wanting to hold on to talent and fearful of losing it to companies that are more flexible. So I don't see any clear answer. I think that there are definitely advantages to being in the office. There are also advantages to hybrid work, or sorry, remote work. It's sort of like it's kind of like the old cloud computing argument, like hybrid cloud, the mix of on-premises versus cloud-based services. It seems to be like the same argument in when it comes to like talent and employment, where you don't want to go too far to one extreme because you're going to alienate one side.
I guess I do feel though that whether it's advantages or disadvantages, just as an example, my husband works in tech at a big Manhattan law firm, and they're having a terrible time trying to get folks back in the office. I mean, they wanted people to come back in like 2 or 3 days a week. They're lucky if they get the tech guys in once a week. So the reality is there
Yeah,
too.
reality is people are, not wanting to do the commutes. Yeah, no, and on the other side, to the point of like, in-person communication could be really helpful in like cracking or like figuring things out. There's always that pro and con. From what we're seeing, it's hard to do hybrid because there will be some people. The minute you decide you're going a little remote, you have people who are not local, and then you start discriminating against the non-local people if you have that hybrid environment, because now suddenly those people who are like 3,000 miles away from you are never meeting you in person, right? So it is tricky. I'm beginning to also be kind of on Sharon's side. We'll see. I think we'll end up maybe becoming fully remote as a tech culture, but hard to say. Yeah, so let's move on from the remote work piece and kind of go back to like actually now, we just said, hey, some of these things which are very hard to do might require in-person work, and definitely what I think we've seen that's been very hard to do is driverless cars. I mean, I think for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even more than that, we've been hearing companies like Google and I guess Waymo right now. So Waymo and Cruise, et cetera, basically saying, hey, we are now kind of GA in a city and we actually have driverless cars running in this place or that place, but it's far from commonplace. At least even in San Francisco, I can't just like, uh, hail a driverless car. And I'm sure you guys are seeing at least some of that, some of that, some of those news articles and announcements coming out. Uh, I mean, in your mind, when do you think it'll actually happen? Whether it's driverless cars or even kind of, let's say, a fully automated robo factory. I mean, we're expecting automation to happen in a big way, but I don't think it's happened yet. How do you see that evolving? Is it another 5 to 10 years away, or is it just like around the corner?
Well, I don't cover particularly the autonomous vehicle space, but and the difference between automation and autonomy, that's actually something that I've covered lately. I've spoken to experts in areas like manufacturing. The automation side has become more commonplace, for industry 4.0 on the factory floor, but moving beyond that to autonomy, where it really runs without human assistance, where machines are self-organizing and self-optimizing to heighten productivity, that seems to be more difficult. That's definitely going to take more time and sounds like it's nowhere near, true maturity. And when it comes to driverless cars, that's what, certainly seems to be the case. When I speak to people, like getting that whole picture together, the full capabilities of a driverless car, and also that's being held to a higher standard than a human driver would be. It just, the nature of AI is that we're asking it to sort of preemptively prove itself in a way that we don't ask humans to do. So even if it is technically safer, we're, statistically, we're holding autonomous anything to a higher standard. That seems to be human
Should we
nature in a
be,
way.
yeah, should we be doing that, or you think there's no way out? It's just human nature.
That's what it sounds like to me, that we'll never get over that, because humans, we're always going to, that's the whole discussion, it seems to me, around explainable AI. We don't ask humans to explain themselves in the same way, but we do expect AI to do that, or else we're not going to be as supportive or trusting of it. So I feel like some of it, from my understanding, that some of it, the challenges are maybe not around the technology itself, but then making it explainable and trustworthy.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think humans just trust each other way more, or just we trust I mean, we know what we can do, so we can understand what another human can do, but we don't really like viscerally understand what the AI is capable or not capable of. So, it could go wrong, it could get dangerous, and so on. So that makes, to your point, autonomy very hard, but automation very possible. Kevin, what's the information's view or your view?
Well, this is also my opinion, and I am by no means an expert in this
That's
area, but I personally feel like the most difficult maneuver in human driving is the left turn at a traffic light with a four-way intersection with oncoming traffic. And I just, honestly, it seems like that will take a very long time to be solved, A. And then the bigger picture for me personally is, the only way it works with fully autonomous everywhere is if everyone gives up their cars. We have a very strong car culture in this country. People love their cars. They love their Mustangs. They love their Camaros.
right.
I don't see people ever giving that up. And if there are going to be a mix of autonomous and people on the road, it's never going to personally feel safe for me.
Is that because you feel like people are like more predictable, the
They're
drivers are less,
unpredictable.
or they're
Yeah,
less predictable, right? Yeah,
people are unpredictable. And if like there's one person out there and
I
in a
see.
world full of autonomous
Got it.
vehicles, that's a wild card.
Right. That person could potentially fool slash like, I don't know, cause the autonomous vehicles to like not react appropriately. Okay. That's a very interesting angle, by the way. I mean, that basically states that this is a problem that we're trying to solve, which may not be easy to solve at all.
Not in
Uh,
this country, maybe
yeah.
other countries.
Not in this country. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah. So like kind of like kind of let's say double clicking on that to the point of like, see, roads are unpredictable. There are humans in there. Automation actually is going to be possible more than autonomy. That still does mean to some extent that we're going to, or we think, everybody thinks that there's going to be this huge kind of change in the workforce, right? That AI is going to take over a lot of the jobs, and humans are just going to be more like, kind of playing kind of like either an augmentation role or kind of maybe a controlling role, telling AI systems what to do. What do we think of that? I mean, is that good? I mean, how right now, of course, we have record unemployment, record employment, very low unemployment. How will that change? I mean, last year or like a couple of years ago, we had Andrew Yang basically saying, "Hey, we need UBI to solve this problem." But right now, we're in the exact opposite place, right? Do you think that's like a decade away, where we're actually going to see significant kind of decreases in the number of jobs available to humans? Or is that even going to happen? Is this always going to be a place where we're going to have more jobs because AI is going to create more interesting, like, spaces for us to explore and so on?
I think it really remains to be seen. When I speak to people, they always remind me of like the Industrial Revolution and when, the car came and they, horses, horse and carriages, every evolution, leads to people. But here, certainly there is a difference and there, we're already seeing, I mean, I just wrote a piece on Dolly, on OpenAI's Dolly, and like, is this going to kill creative careers? The graphic designer, the illustrator, the advertising agency designer. And it was really interesting because a lot of the creative professionals see the benefit, and they're already using it for concepting, for coming up with ideas, and even coming through with other options. But on the other hand, there's serious issues around ownership, and are people going to start firing their graphics teams? So I think it kind of remains to be seen, depending on the industry, and we'll always see. I just feel like this is something that will come up over and over again.
Kevin, your
Yeah,
thoughts?
it's a really tough one. I hate to say that again, but I just have a really hard time seeing a world where people aren't allowed to be creative, or the creativity just gets replaced by machines. I think at that point we would really have to sort of question a lot of things, like why are we even here? So I think the argument about automating the heavy lifting and
Yeah.
freeing up people to move higher in the stack, I think that does hold water for me personally. um I don't know. I can't really envision the extent to which this automation is going to disrupt our society, and in particular, sort of the employment part of our society. Um, I think it might, personally, I don't see it happening, but like I said, I'm not an expert. It's kind of like the driverless car question, where I just can't really see the future that some people are seeing, some experts out there are seeing.
Yeah,
Sometimes
no,
I think it has to do with, here I am as a writer and an editor. Well, who could replace that? But then, of course, there are many AI companies coming out with content generators, and you can say, well, that could still never replace my skill or my creativity. But who knows? I feel like, it remains to be seen. Maybe you don't see it coming for you until it's until it's already out there.
that's actually a good thought right there. I mean, I mean, if you look at history, the most likely answer is probably that it's going to play more of like a complementary role. It's going to, the free up to think about other things. And even as when it comes to writing, and I'm sure you probably have seen, some gimmick or the other where some article has been written by an AI and so on. I mean, personally, where you are right now, like knowing what AI is capable of, do you actually see, like, in our like last panel, James mentioned that he uses Copilot to help write code, and are you guys using any kind of AI tools today, or do you think about, or you think, or are you thinking about like maybe I want to try this out? Anything like that on your on your radars?
I mean, in terms of writing
Yeah,
itself,
yeah.
no, but when I think about how many tools I do use in my writing process, everything
Right,
from AI powered transcription
right.
to recording to editing to spell check to
Spell
Grammarly
check,
to,
Grammarly,
there's
or
a million
yeah,
things. And when you
yeah.
put that all together, you're really supported. I mean, in a way, it's really changed my life as in my profession in good ways. But you can, so I feel like it may not always play out the way you expect, but no, I can't say I've tested any of the content generators.
Yeah, content generators. Kevin, have you tested any or tried it, tried
I
them out?
use I use those tools as well, and frankly, I think this goes back to the what I just said before about, those tools free you up as a reporter to make more higher level decisions. I mean, when you're chasing a story, there are so many
Yeah,
decisions to make, especially as you get closer to publication, who to call, which quotes to use, what angle to take on a story, and which will be developed in conjunction with an editor. But yeah, I think that AI offloading a lot of that heavy lifting definitely makes for better journalism.
the thing about talking to you guys that's really like striking me is that you're talking to the media is far more. There's a lot more pragmatism versus like in some ways talking to the researchers and even practitioners who are like probably a lot more kind of, I would say, exuberant about like the situation as of today. But having said that, I mean, I'm sure you guys get a lot of stories. You have to like kind of like make those trade-offs and which stories you want to cover, which you don't. Has there been any? I mean, the extent that you're willing to share with us in your career, has there been any stories that you have covered that you regret covering for whatever reason? It could be like, hey, I didn't see the consequences of this or what have you. Uh, any anecdotes?
I can't really think of any that fall into that category. For me, it's more an issue of like, even looking back, just being able to corral the vast, tsunami of information that's out there, especially in a field like AI and machine learning, and being able to wade through it and make judgments about,
Yeah.
what to cover and not to cover, or even to make sure that you're learning everything you need to, wrapping your arms around it. When I think of how much research is out there, I feel like the pace seems to have just exponentially expanded, and I'm not sure how anyone, let alone a reporter, would be able to truly get a handle on that. If you talk about a favorite topic like computer vision, how many research papers were, submitted this year? So, my challenge is always to see, how can I at least, wrap my mind around this, hurricane of an inbox that I have every day.
Yeah, so then you're actually making trade-offs in terms of like, which one should I choose to like cover versus not, right? How do you do that? Maybe are you willing to share a little bit more about that process? Hmm?
I guess I really do try and follow as many experts and thought leaders as I can to see what they're talking about, to see what's really in the zeitgeist. Because I feel like, I'm a bit of an outsider, so I'm kind of looking in to see like what are you guys talking about, and then seeing how I can angle that in a way that's interesting to our readers, that's in the zeitgeist, that's jumping off of a news story or a big company doing something or other. Sometimes it's hard not to focus on things that I'm just personally interested in or I get excited about, like, if I think a product is cool or something like that, or if I stay away from something that's a little more challenging for me to understand. So I try and get over that and make sure that I'm, talking to the right people and who can give me a heads up on like, no, that's really something big.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. Kevin, how about you?
I agree entirely with Sharon. I think that in some ways, especially when you're writing about AI, as a reporter, you are kind of an interpreter between communities, one of which is the experts, the other is your readership. So I remember 5, 6 years ago, I guess one regret I have is that voice was starting to take off, digital assistants were starting to take off. And I wish I had been a little more skeptical about the business case, because I remember writing about things like voice powered games and just commerce generally, and the opportunities that voice was going to bring to commerce. That really hasn't materialized the way that I think a lot of people thought it would. It may yet materialize, but so far that doesn't seem to be much of a thing. And so I wish I had taken a little bit more of a skeptical eye to things to that topic specifically.
I will say that in terms of stuff like right now, for example, I'm trying to be really careful and thoughtful about what I cover around something like emotion AI, because I feel like it has a lot of, creepy
Hot.
elements to
Yeah.
it, and a lot of things that people are concerned about. But on the other hand, analysts tell me that this is really interesting. This, is going in a lot of cool research directions and stuff like that. But a lot of products that come out, it's kind of like, I don't know. It just, I'm trying to understand like what's really got a very useful use case that isn't, 100% creepy, and what, still seems to need some ironing out when it comes to dealing with things like bias. So.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, even recently we had that whole controversy, I think, about someone from Google thinking that the AI is like, conscious and like, and then there was a lot of media coverage on that, and it's very hard to decide whether, that's worth covering or
Yeah, and
not.
I really wanted to cover it and did cover it, but I had to think a lot about who I was talking to and what I was saying, and how I was saying it. I felt like I didn't want to play into this like massive media hype of things that, other experts are screaming that's just not reality. That's not what it is. So
Yeah. And another example that also comes to mind, and I don't know if either of you guys covered that, was the idea around creativity. I do think like humans are obviously inherently more creative, but even 2 years ago, people were like, AI is completely not capable of any creative stuff, music, art, anything. It's very hard to say that DALL-E is not creative right now, right? In fact, recently I got trolled by a bunch of, or whatever, like yelled at by a bunch of artists when I said DALL-E was, had artistic capabilities. I think we're going to face some really hard problems, and in that kind of arena, something which is actually probably more important than these questions is of course the question of ethics in AI. And what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the media has really pushed big tech and other AI companies to really think about ethics, which I think has largely been a very good influence. What are your thoughts on that area? Are companies being careful, because it can be a very dangerous weapon if AI is used in a bad way? And do we need to do more?
I'll go. I think this is absolutely a very interesting topic. It's one that I haven't written much about, but I think I would like to. I think the media has been very quick to jump on important topics. Zoom, for example, when they introduced the was it an emotional detector or something that would be able to discern someone's mood during a call, that was immediately jumped on. And I think that maybe the company might have started talking about it in a way that, I mean, there needs to be a ton of PR around all of this, because these things are very sensitive topics and people get freaked out by the idea that they're being watched and being tracked. So yeah, I think that we do play an important role. um, Companies also need to, like I said, couch the way that they, you know the example always goes back to Boston Dynamics, and the way that Google sort of had blowback from how the robots looked and how people were freaked out by those. Ironically, that wasn't even machine learning, right? Those were just programmed to act that way. But it just kind of goes to show that people don't really know broadly in society what what AI is, how it works. And so it's really going to be a joint effort between the media and companies that develop it to make sure that people understand.
Yep.
Yeah, I've actually been covering this a lot. It's one of the things that I personally am into talking about. But when I speak to people about AI, well, when I see people talking about it, like on Twitter, there's so much talk about it. There seems to be a tremendous amount of discussion and debate. And sometimes I do wonder how much of it is lip service, especially when I see how hard it is to push against the tide of issues related to like bias when there are, when the technology is just going there regardless. It's almost like you're pushing against this huge tide. But so when I speak to legal experts, they say, well, companies need to deal with this now because regulation is coming. Legislation is coming that if you're not, dealing with this now, it's going to be forced upon you. So it's nice to think that, all companies are in it to be moral and ethical just on their own, and many are. But there are so many issues related to it coming in the EU, which might have a very broad swath of AI related regulations. But even here in the US, I recently published a list of like the bills that are being proposed or have already passed, like state by state. There's just a whole bunch of stuff related to, like, New York City has a new bill that was passed related to hiring and the use of AI tools, bias in hiring and employment. So companies kind of have to get on board here, or else it's going to be done for them, I think, in some way.
Right. No, I completely agree. And I also think the media has played a really vital role here. And a lot of like over the last few years, I feel like that's happened in many different arenas, and especially in when it comes to AI, I think they've played a vital role in terms of like highlighting the bias issues, that, the issues around ethics. And that has actually made a lot of these companies more aware. And you're absolutely right. That like will end up in some sort of a regulation or some sort of legislation. So I mean, to the point of like, hey, media playing such a key role. I mean, I've always been personally a political junkie, so I've always like kind of really respected the role of media in that world. And lately, I feel like the tech media also has become very prominent in terms of, kind of, I would say, shaping the space. We've seen a lot of like all the way from, I would say, there was this famous New York Times article a long time ago about Amazon. I'm sure you probably remember, and that helped change Amazon's culture dramatically. They pointed out some issues. This has happened now much more often. And Kevin, maybe this is more kind of like the work you do. Uh, how do you think you're impacting the tech landscape? I'm sure, Sharon, you're doing this in the ethics and all of that sort of thing. So just what's the role of media? Like, I mean, yes, there is reporting, there is kind of covering news, but also I think there's a vital role you guys are playing in shaping the world. How do you think about that? Hmm?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one, because I don't think like the goal we have is to shape. I think it's something that
Okay.
just comes through based on what you cover and how you cover it. I know for us at the information, our goal is just to always provide unique perspectives. And so if we were looking at a specific type of technology, like computer vision, for example, we would
Yeah.
try to come up with viewpoints or perspectives that haven't been covered before, whether that's obtaining unreported info about something a company is doing, or, in other cases, some of the most valuable stories are just writing something that hasn't been written before. And there is, I think, in tech media these days, specifically about AI, everyone does seem to cover the topics pretty similarly. So I know our goal is just to kind of present it in a different way, and of course, make it understandable. That's the most important thing.
Sharon, your
I think
thoughts?
for me at VentureBeat, I'm tasked with covering AI and machine learning from the standpoint of reaching, enterprise decision makers, really in the business. Um, I do think a lot of times I'm trying to I'm coming at as a reporter who's always learning, and so I feel like in a way, I think Kevin said before, I feel a little bit like I'm interpreting, like what's going on in research and in labs, and how is it being used to in the enterprise? How can people learn from it? But also kind of trying to balance, the hype versus the reality, because that's what enterprises are having to do. They're having to listen to a million vendors hype up their product about what it can do and what it can't do. And they also are having to balance what their customers understand or don't understand about the way they're using AI and machine learning. So sometimes I get the feeling like with some of these very hyped up issues around AI sentience, for example, or emotion I think, companies really need to understand, that, the data science community needs to understand that the average person isn't going to understand the real nuances of that. And I'm hoping that I can bring to some of my articles, some background and information that really, talks about the reality versus the hype.
Fantastic. Okay, that's a good way to end the conversation. Actually, my last question, before signing off this panel, was going to be exactly that. On a 0 to 10 scale, where 10 is like AI is like overly hyped, to 0 being, hey, there is a lot more to. I mean, we need to hype it more than we are doing today, because it might actually be more transformational than we think. Let's leave with, because especially because you're in the media, let's leave with parting thoughts from both of you guys, in terms of where we are on that scale, as well as anything else you'd like to share with our audience.
I guess for me, I don't think of it as hype versus not hype, that we
Okay.
need to hype more or hype less. I'm hoping to, you know, this is what AI can do. I do think the researchers there, looking for the pie in the sky down the road, and we are certainly wanting to share like, forward thinking, but we're also like, at least, I am approaching it definitely from like more and more from like an applied AI perspective. Here's how it's being used. Is the potential now and in the nearer term, because I think there's so much of that in a way people don't realize. There's so much out there. It's, as I say, it's a hurricane every day.
That's great.
When I
Kevin?
started covering this beat in 2016, I remember just, I talked to people, friends, family who were not in technology at all. And, they hear AI and they have a preconceived notion about what that is often based on movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and others. And, people would say, oh, killer robots, things like that. And, I guess over time, I've sort of come to realize that it's our job as reporters to kind of move beyond that and to get into the nuts and bolts of how this stuff works. And really, I've explained to these people, yes, killer robots are a thing, but there's also a lot of other applications. AI can be used to make your customer experience interactions on the phone less painful. I think a lot of people can relate to that, um, as well as just a galaxy of other use cases. So, I think that society is kind of, I think Alexa and Google Home and devices and software like that has helped to bring it home a little bit about what AI is and how it works.
Fantastic. Thank you both for coming to this panel. Very much appreciated. And see you both soon.